Hi guys, this is Lauren with Lauren Watkins Art, and today I'm going to be doing a soft pastel demo for you. This demo I'm going to be using pastel pencils. This is the reference photo I'm going to be looking at as I draw and paint. So I'm going to keep the picture up in the bottom right hand corner so you can look at it and compare it to what I am creating. Now I am working on UArt sanded paper. This is a sketchbook that I made so that I could have the paper I like to use for soft pastels. I found it's kind of hard to find a good soft pastel sketchbook. And then I sketched out the basic shapes that I saw in my reference photo using a pastel pencil. And now I'm taking Dr. P.H. Martin's Bombay India ink in blue, and I am blocking in some of the blue areas of this painting, and I'm going to use it to help block in just areas I want to be toned a little bit darker. I'll also be toning my paper using my pastel pencils. And I'm just diluting this ink out using rubbing alcohol. You can use water. I just like to use rubbing alcohol to blend out the inks and the soft pastels in the underpainting stage because it dries a little bit more quickly. But if you do not have ink, you can do your underpainting as long as your paper is meant to hold a liquid. You can use a watercolor underpainting, or you could just use your soft pastels, block in your basic shapes, and then blend it out with the rubbing alcohol. You don't need to have the inks. So you can see I went in with a cool green and some blues to kind of block in those distant mountains. And now I'm blending it out using a paintbrush and rubbing alcohol. Now the paintbrushes I am using for this underpainting stage are just really cheap golden Taklon brushes. I am not using anything nice. Remember, my paper is literally artist grade sandpaper, and so it's going to chew up those paintbrushes. So don't use anything nice for an underpainting. Once I got those distant mountains blocked in, then I started working on the next layer of mountains. So I'm just going in with a slightly darker, more saturated blue to start blocking in those shadow areas and just blocking in the basic colors and the basic shapes of those mountains. What I like about doing an underpainting is that, one, it tones my paper. So with soft pastels, they are more opaque than watercolor. So watercolor, you typically work light to dark and you build up your shadow areas. With pastels, they are more opaque, so you can work dark to light. And so by toning my paper with kind of a mid-tone, it gives me a better gauge of how light or dark something is, a pigment that I lay down. And it keeps like speckles of the paper from showing through in areas that I don't want the paper to shine through. It also lets me kind of block in the shapes and get a feel for how the painting is going to work before I start committing to more opaque pastels. So it's just, you kind of figure out how your brain processes information and what rituals and order of operations works best for your brain to kind of get in the mode and kind of think about a painting as a whole. Once I did those kind of mid-level mountains, then I started on this meadow area, and you can see the color got a lot brighter in this section. And that's because in my reference photo, that's where the sun is shining. That is where the light is hitting the grass. It's kind of having this lovely glow. And by making those distant mountains more blue-gray, they recede visually. And then having that area that is in the sun be a lot more vibrant, a lot warmer in value, really allows it to pop and stand out. And then this foreground, the very, very bottom of the paper, is just a little bit darker because I want that to read as being in shadow. Now I'm coming back in with my inks. I added a little bit of a magenta ink to that blue, so it's just a little bit more of a purple blue. And I'm starting to block in where I want some of these really strong shadows to be. And there are two main reasons why I like doing a dark shadow underpainting with this ink. And one is the dark ink kind of acts as an anchor point. So as I'm blending out my pastels and I'm painting up all these different layers, sometimes my underpainting can get covered and I can lose my spot and kind of lose where everything is in relation to itself in the picture. And having these dark marks where like the shadows are, it reminds me like, oh, this is where the tree goes in relationship to everything else, where my other lines might get more easily covered. The second thing is I started doing this when I first got my pastels, and I didn't have a huge selection to choose from. And I found that I didn't often have really good colorful darks, like saturated darks in my collection. I'd have a black, but I didn't have really dark browns or really dark blues or really dark greens. And so my paintings kind of looked a little bit dead because I had to use black so often. And I would try to layer other colors with it, but if you're doing finer details, sometimes it's hard to blend those together. And I was listening to another artist, I can't remember her name now, but she talked about how she did an ink underpainting to help get those darks dark enough from the beginning. And that saturation, because I could use a really dark ink for it, allows me to lend color that feels a little bit more lively than just a straight black. So that's why I do those dark ink shadows. And then you can see I started blocking in my skies. So I used different colors of blues, and now I'm going in with a light gray to start blocking in the shape of the clouds. Now, when you're typically with a sky, it's darker blue up at the top and it gets lighter as you go towards the bottom. So I'm trying to keep that in mind as I'm painting. And the reason why I started with a mid-tone on my clouds instead of a pure white is because it's only bright white on the highlights where the sun's hitting it. And then there's quite a bit of grays and gray blues on the shadow side of the clouds. So by starting with a mid-tone, then it's easy to shift some areas a little bit lighter and make some areas a little bit darker, and then I can blend it out to get a soft, fluffy cloud appearance. Now I'm using several different blending tools with this painting. So as you see me work on this picture, you'll see me use basically 3 categories of blending tools. The first one is a paper stump. So it's just rolled up paper, rolled to a point, and that creates a really soft, feathery blend. It picks up a lot of pigment though as well, so it can lift off a lot of the pigment that you've put down, but you can really blend your colors together and get a really soft, even blend. The other 2 are like rubber or silicone based, and some of them are more in like this pencil form, like what you see I'm holding, and it's basically a stick with a little rubber end on it. These are called like rubber shapers or clay shapers, and they are used a lot in like polymer clay art or pottery, and the rubber end on them comes in different shapes, and you can really utilize that when you are blending your pastels. And what the rubber shaper does is instead of like picking up a lot of pigment and blending it together and lifting it off of the paper, it pushes it in. So instead of getting like really soft blends, but you lose a lot of pigment, it pushes it in and it gives you more like a smudge blending effect. And you don't create as much dust with it. And then I have a bigger version that's like a rectangle that's kind of off-white, and that allows you to do the same thing but in a bigger area. So I have quite a few rubber shapers. Some have a white end and a blue handle. Some of them have a red handle with a gray end. You'll see me use all different shapes throughout this picture, but that's kind of the 3 main categories of blending tools that I'm using. If you want to learn about other ways to blend your soft pastel, you can click the link right here, and it will show you a video where I compare and contrast different ways to blend your soft pastels. And now I am working on the far distant mountains on the picture, and this is actually the area that gave me the most trouble with the picture because I was using a limited palette. Essentially, I was only picking from certain pastel box collections that I had, and so I didn't have the exact color or colors ready to roll. And I don't even know if I used all of my pastel pencils I have available to me, if I still would have found the exact color. So I go back and forth with layering it and getting it to where I'm happy with. And I will go back and tweak these mountains until almost the very end of this video, because I think I'll have it right, and then I work on other areas of the painting, and then I'll realize it's still too dark, because if it's too dark, it comes forward too much, and I really want to get that sense of distance and depth, and so I needed to gray it out and lighten it up, but I also wanted it to read blue, a kind of a blue-green color. So you'll see me go back and forth. The real trick is don't press too hard when you are building up lots of layers and you're doing your pastels, because if you fill in the tooth of your paper, then you can't go back and tweak it. As I worked, I kept a really light hand, I blended things out, and I didn't fill in the tooth of the paper, and so I could always go back and tweak and adjust the color and the value of that area until I was happy with it. So I found a point where I was like, I'm just going to let this be. I'm going to work on some of these other areas, and then I can go back and reevaluate these distant mountains. So you can see I'm working kind of on the next layer of mountains and hills, and I am just starting to build up those colors. And as I move forward, the colors in this picture become more saturated, and the shadows are a lot stronger. So just blocking it in. There's a different rubber shaper tool. This one is a little bit pointier and it's a little bit softer, so it flexes a little bit more than the other one I was using. So again, kind of going back, I'm adding more blues, more grays to those distant mountains so they lighten up in value and they recede a little bit more visually, and then I'll start working on the foreground. And I go back and forth a lot in this picture, more than what I used to, and that's because I hadn't really worked with pastels other than one time in the last year for a workshop I was teaching. I hadn't really worked with them that much, and so this is kind of a relearning, reacquainting myself with the medium video. We moved about 2 years ago, and our house had sat empty for 6 years. And when we moved in, it needed a lot of TLC, and so I've spent a lot of the last 2 years fixing up the house, painting areas. I've painted a few murals and doing yard work, but murals are done with acrylic paints, not with pastels, and they're two very different mediums. But I'm happy to say I finally have an art studio set up, and so I can film and teach, and this is the first thing I filmed in my new art studio, and it feels really good to be back creating and teaching online again. So now I'm just working on that second layer of mountains, and I'm kind of keeping in mind the value of what I'm painting and the tone. So this set of mountains on the left-hand side is more in shadow, and so it's cooler in value and it's darker than what is across from it on the right-hand side, where it's a lot warmer of a green tone, it's a lot brighter, and so I'm keeping that in mind as I'm selecting my colors and layering them. The other thing I'm doing a lot is watching, I want to call it brush strokes because I'm used to painting, but the strokes of my pencil. And that's because the way you apply your pigment to your paper, whether it's paint or pencil or charcoal or whatever, the direction you apply that pigment to your paper or canvas will tell a lot about what's going on. So I'm trying to create a lot of depth within this picture. I want those mountains to recede. I want to make it look like I'm looking at things really, really far away. Well, the farthest mountains, I can't see trees on, not really. And then the next closest mountains, I can see a little bit of fuzziness where those trees are. And so by doing a little bit more of an up and down stroke with my pencil and with how I blend, then I'm implying that there's some pine trees there. And then the next layer, those trees get a little bit taller. There's a little bit more color variation within them. And so those read as being a little bit closer. It's the same with the meadow. The distant meadow area of this grassy area is just a mass of color. So my brush strokes for that, or my pencil markings, are going to be a lot more left to right or horizontal. And then as I move forward, I'll start doing a little bit more of an up and down motion until I get to the very bottom of my paper where it's closest to me visually in my reference photo. And that's where I'll do a really long brush strokes or pencil marking, to imply that we can see a lot more detail, we can see individual blades of grass, and so on. And that will help create depth within our picture. And now I'm working on these pine trees that are a little bit closer. So not only am I going up and down, but I'm starting to show a little bit more texture within these pine trees. So I'm doing kind of like a zigzag motion side to side, and I'm getting a little bit more dimension in them. So I have kind of shadow colors with dark blues, lighter greens that are a little bit more olive in tone, that look like the sunlight's hitting them. And I'm just starting to build up the depth within that area. And now I'm starting to move down towards that grassy meadow area. And so I'm doing more horizontal pencil strokes, just like we talked about a little bit earlier. I'm also keeping my colors still a little bit more muted to help create more depth, because the further away something is, the less saturated it is, the more gray toned it is. So I'm still in that distant meadow area. I'm lightening it up and I'm making it feel like the sun's hitting it, but I'm keeping it lighter in value. So I'm not using as vibrant of a yellow in that meadow or as vibrant of a green, because I want them to recede visually. And then as I go along, I'll get more and more saturated. The contrast between highlights and shadows will get stronger, and that will help create depth within the picture. Now I am pulling from 3 different brands of pastel pencils for this picture. I am using the Faber Castellated Pitt pastels, I'm using the Stabilo Carbothello pastel pencils, and I'm using the Gioconda pastel pencils. You don't have to use that many pencils, or that you don't have to have that many brands to create beautiful artwork. All it means is that you will have fewer colors to pick from, or convenient mixes, and you might have to layer your colors and blend them on the paper to get them to be where you want them to be. But that's what I'm using if you are curious. Now you can see I've started to imply that there are little shrubs in this meadow. So I did little up and down marks, and I did a highlight side and a shadow side. And then I also created a little cast shadow where I just did a dark horizontal line coming off of where those bushes are. And that's helping to imply depth, where the sun's coming from, all of that. And now I'm going in with my brighter yellows and light green colors to start to imply where the sun is hitting this meadow area. And I'm even using like pale light pinks and pale light oranges in that area just to really warm it up, to feel like the sun's hitting it. So in addition to be lighter in value, I'm using warmer colors on the color wheel to help imply that warmth of the sun hitting that area. Now I'm starting to block in where the grass and the river meets, and to help imply that it's water and to help differentiate it, I am making sure where the grass is, I'm going a lot more vertical with my strokes like we talked about earlier. And then when I blend out the water, I'm going to make sure I keep it very horizontal. And that difference in texture and stroke, where some is going up more vertically and the other is very smooth and horizontal, that will help us visually differentiate the water from the grass. And I'm sorry if I sound really out of breath with these voiceovers. I am currently 9 months pregnant, and I have a baby pushing on my lungs, which makes it sound like I just got done running a marathon when I've been sitting. So I'm really sorry if I sound out of breath with this voiceover, but it is what it is. Now that tool that I was using with the white end and the blue handle, that was another rubber shaper or clay shaper. It's just the micro ones that I bought that are teeny tiny, and they're really nice for getting in small details, especially when I'm working on a small sketchbook like this. And you can see that grass that's a little bit more distant to imply that there's some texture. I just did like little tiny squiggly motions with my my pencil just to imply like little clumps of grass. There's some that's standing up, but as I get closer to the bottom of this paper, they're getting taller and you're seeing more individual blades versus just like a little lump to imply texture. But that's going to help create that depth that we were talking about. And then blending it out with my rubber shapers and going back and forth using a variety of greens. Even though I am making this a lot brighter, I still need to have some shadow colors. So I have some darker greens towards the bottom and in different areas to allow those highlights to stand out. So if you find that your bright color that you're using, that's the brightest color in that area, isn't standing out enough, it means the colors next to it need to darken up just a smidge so that you can get that range of value. And now I'm just blending and softening up some of those lines. I really liked this shape of blending tool because it had such a nice point on it. When I wanted individual blades of grass to be blended out, I could easily do that, or I could lay it on its side and do a big blend of another area. Now I'm starting to block in this tree. Now in the reference photo, this tree is like cut in half and it's just clear on the edge, but I wanted a little bit more of it to show in my picture. So I'm taking an artistic license and I slightly moved it over. And so I blocked in some of those dark areas using a mixture of dark browns and dark greens and some navy blues. And I'm making sure I have a nice fine point on my pencil. The pencil sharpener I recommend is Swordfish Icon pencil sharpener. I just bought it off of Amazon. You can buy replacement blades for it, but it's hands down the best pencil sharpener I have found for pastel pencils so far. If you want to see a whole review of different kinds of pencil sharpeners, you can click the link here. And I'm not sponsored. No one's paid me to share this. I don't even have an affiliate link to Amazon. I just really love this pencil sharpener. When I saw another artist recommend it and they said how much they loved it, I was excited to try it, and it was game-changing. Pastel pencils are a lot more fragile than your typical colored pencils, and pencil sharpeners are notorious for chewing them up, but I also don't like sharpening pencils with a knife by hand. I despise that. And so finding a pencil sharpener that's delicate enough to handle pastel pencils was game-changing, and I like to share that information with everyone who is interested. And as I went on my pencil sharpening tangent, I made a lot of progress on this meadow area. You can see the water is more lively than it was before. That's because I added some darker colors for the shadows, some pale blue highlights so that it looks like the sparkles of a water reflecting the sunlight. And then I also added a lot more depth along the bank of the water and just really started to get a lot more of those details in. And now I am just darkening up this foreground area. I wasn't paying attention when I was doing the underpainting section of the painting at the beginning, and I didn't make this nearly dark enough. And so now I'm going in with my pastel pencils, blending it out, doing kind of a circular blending job so that I can have a base shadow area to work from. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but I jump around all over the picture. Some artists can work from top to bottom, or they work from like the eyes out on a portrait and they hardly ever go back and tweak and adjust things. I have a little bit of ADHD when I'm working, and so I jump around my picture all the time and I tweak and adjust. And when I was looking at my painting, after I'd done more of the meadow area and the foreground, I realized that that one left-hand mountain area wasn't dark enough compared to everything else. So I needed to darken that up. And then I'm taking those shadows to the front or the foreground and starting to deepen that up as well. The nice thing with pastels is they are pretty opaque. And so if you mess up something, you make it too light, you can always put another layer of pastels over the top. You can even make something lighter. If you made it too dark, you can put a lighter color over it, just as long as you haven't filled in the tooth of your paper. But even still, there are some fixes around that. So if you are working and you realize that you need to tweak and adjust something on your picture, but your paper isn't accepting any more pastels, you can spray something called workable fixative. Now this will darken up the value of your image just a little bit, but you can then do 1 to 3 or 4 layers of pastel over the top of that. And so it gives you a little bit of a wiggle room, and it can really save you when you've made a mistake. Just be careful not to get too heavy-handed because it will create a little bit of a sheen and darken things up. The other thing you can do is pull out softer pastels. So your pastel pencils are pretty hard in texture, in the range of what is considered a soft pastel. They're soft compared to your colored pencils, but they're a lot firmer of a pastel than a traditional pastel stick. So if your paper isn't accepting any more pastel pencils, you could take your pastel sticks and do another 1 or 2 layers over the top of that if you need to add that bright highlight and you lost it and you can't add any more. So just some workarounds if you are feeling a little bit stuck in your picture. So now I'm really just working on refining this foreground. So it is a little bit more in shadow, but even within the shadow section, those 2 sage brushes at the bottom corners of this picture are a lot cooler in value or tone than the grass around it. So the grass reads a little bit stronger of a green, where the sagebrush reads almost blue. And so I'm trying to capture that within the picture. So the sagebrush has a little bit more of a blue-green in it, whereas the grass section is a little bit warmer. And then once I got the grass and all of those things blocked in a little bit more how I want them to stay, then I can go in and start adding the details of the wildflowers growing within this meadow. I didn't want to add those too early because as I was blending it out, they would either smudge too much and mix in a way I didn't want them to, or I'd just lose them. As you are working, you tend to do your big shapes, and then as you go along, you do more and more detail. And so I saved these little polka dots where the flowers are going to be towards the very end so that they could really, really stand out. And we are on the home stretch of this picture. There is not that much left to do. I am just refining, looking at my picture, seeing what needs to be tweaked or adjusted, looking at my reference photo for guides, but honestly, I'm looking at what my individual picture needs. Now, this is a stage in a painting where I really recommend taking a break. Anytime you feel frustrated with a picture, I recommend taking a break. But when you are at like the 90% mark, 85% mark, I really recommend stepping away and doing something else, and then coming back and looking at your picture with fresh eyes, because you can pick up what things need to be tweaked or adjusted to make your picture be the best it can be. And that isn't always what you see in the reference photo, because sometimes our picture needs something different than what we see in the reference photo. You want to emphasize something, you want to adjust the colors a little bit more, what you want something else to be the focus, whatever it may be. You need to look at your picture and see what it needs. You can tell in my reference photo, the whole color scheme of my picture is a lot cooler in value. If I were to go back and tweak and adjust this, I probably would warm up that middle meadow section where the sunlight is hitting. I could have used warmer green tones for that and some warmer yellows to really help it feel warm. Like you can tell that the sunlight is hitting that area, but it's just, I don't know, it doesn't feel as sunny because it's so cool toned in value. So that's probably something I would tweak and adjust on my individual picture if I was to do it again. But overall, I'm really happy with how this picture turned out. And I had a lot of fun doing it. It was a really good reminder of why I like working with pastels and why I missed working with them. And now I'm just doing the last few tweaks and adjustments to the picture so that I can be happy with it. If you liked this demo and you found it helpful, please, please, please hit the like button. If you have any questions or comments or requests from me, please leave them in the comments down below and I will do my best to answer them. And if you want to see more of what I create here on the channel, have more demos or product reviews and all that wonderful stuff, please hit the follow button and notification bell so that you can be notified when I upload. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.